Just yesterday, on December 11th, 2020, the Food and Drug Administration, or what most people call the FDA, finally allowed for the Pfizer vaccine to start being distributed to patients in the United States. So this happened just a few days after the United Kingdom finally gave the green light for the Pfizer vaccine in that country to be given to patients living in that country, but quickly afterwards, the United States allowed for the same to happen in this country. And that means that pretty soon people in the United States will start receiving the vaccine. I assume that the first people to receive the vaccine will be healthcare workers and people who are likely to get seriously screwed over if they contract this virus, meaning people with serious pre existing health conditions and people that are pretty old in age, so above the age of 70 or 80. In the United Kingdom, the first few patients to receive this vaccine, which was a few days ago on December 8th, the first few patients were all above the age of 80. The first person in the world to receive the Pfizer vaccine that was not in a trial was in the United Kingdom on December 8th, which I believe was a Monday. No, it was actually a Tuesday, my bad. Yeah, December 8th was just this past Tuesday. The first person in the world to receive this vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, outside of a trial was actually a 90-year-old woman who was actually a grandmother. And since she was really old in age, she was prioritized. She, along with many other older people, were prioritized in the vaccination process. But once most of the people above the age of, let's say, 70 or 80 receive this vaccine, then afterwards people that are younger will start receiving the vaccine as well. Ultimately, the goal is to get at least 70 or 80% of the population vaccinated because that is when you reach herd immunity and that is when you can start preventing massive outbreaks of COVID-19 from taking place. The level of herd immunity varies between virus and virus. For COVID-19, it's believed to be around 70%, but for other viruses, such as measles, for example, has a herd immunity threshold of around 95%, which is pretty high. That means in order for herd immunity to be achieved with the measles virus, at least 95% of the population has to actually be immune from the virus. And the reason why the threshold is so high for measles is because of how easily the virus spreads. With COVID-19, though, it doesn't spread quite as easily as measles does, but it does still spread relatively easily. It definitely spreads more easily than the flu. As a result, COVID-19 has a herd immunity threshold of around 70%. 60 to 70% is the estimated range, but the exact percentage is not exactly known. But it's important that we reach that threshold sometime in the next few months because already we've had so many deaths from this virus. We recently, in the United States, just passed the 300,000 death count mark. Just these past couple of days, we finally reached 300,000 deaths in total in the United States from COVID 19. Just a couple months ago, that number was at 200,000, but in the past couple months, we've been experiencing what I call the third wave or third spike of COVID 19 in the United States. And this wave has been worse than either of the previous waves. It was worse than the spring wave, which affected the Northeast badly, and the summer wave, which affected the South pretty badly. I think that one of the reasons why this wave was so bad is because it universally affected the entire United States pretty badly. Nearly every single state in the country, with maybe the exception of Hawaii, but I'm going to explain why that was an exception. Almost every state in the country has been experiencing a massive uptick in the daily case count and soon after daily death count. When you have an increase in the daily case count, especially a massive increase in the daily case count, you can expect it to take around 3 to 4 weeks for the daily death count to follow along in the increase. And that's what happened in the summer. You first started seeing the rapid increase in the daily case count in middle of June, but the increase in the death count happened in the first week of July, early July, I believe. The reason why that time delay actually happens is because once you get the virus, you're not just going to die right away from the virus. Most people who end up passing away from this virus don't do so immediately after they get it. That would be a very deadly virus if the virus killed off the host right after the person was infected. If that person just died off immediately, that would mean two things. One, the virus would be very deadly, as in it would have a very high mortality rate. If you got the virus, you're basically screwed. But the other thing would be that it would not spread very far. If the virus just killed someone off after like a couple days, then that person wouldn't have much time to spread the virus, and it would spread a lot more slowly than COVID-19 has been spreading. So ironically, a virus like that would actually cause fewer deaths in the grand scheme of things than COVID-19 has caused way fewer deaths when you consider how slowly that sort of virus would spread. It's kind of like Ebola virus. It spread pretty slowly, but once you got the virus, you had a high chance of dying. COVID 19 is different in that you have a low chance of dying if you get the virus, but it's easy to spread. But ultimately, COVID 19 has caused way more deaths than Ebola ever has. And that is kind of the paradox that's at play. It seems counterintuitive that a less deadly virus actually causes more deaths in total, but because of how easily it spreads, that's why that happens. But most people who get COVID 19, they either survive or if they die, it takes them a couple of weeks to actually pass away from the virus. First, they don't experience any symptoms, then it starts with mild symptoms, and then it gets worse and worse. Eventually, they have to get hospitalized. Most people, they don't even reach the point of hospitalization, but even if they do, then they usually recover. But occasionally, some people have to get serious treatment for the virus, but eventually, certain a small percentage of the population, a small percentage of the people who get the virus eventually pass away from it. Usually they pass away from the virus 3 to 4 weeks after they first contract it, and that is why you see the time delay between an increase in the daily case count and increase in the daily death count. You also saw this take place in the past couple months. You first saw an increase in the daily case count in middle of October, the first few weeks of October, and it got really bad late October, early November, but the daily death count didn't really increase much until I believe it was sometime in November, and now it's at its absolute worst. We're seeing more deaths in a single day. We've been seeing more deaths every day than the total number of deaths from 9/11. 9/11, the total number of deaths from that tragedy was just under 3,000, I believe, but we're seeing around that many deaths take place in the United States every single day from this virus. And in total, the number of people that have died from COVID 19 is around 100 times more than the number of people that have died from 9/11 at this point. 9/11 was just a single event, a single very tragic, very deadly event that took place on one day, while on the other hand, COVID 19 is a deadly tragedy that has been going on for months and months inside the United States, and it has been affecting the lives of everybody in this country for so many months. Ever since the shutdowns first began in March, because that is when the daily case count spiraled out of control. The first wave began in March, the first wave of this virus in the United States, it began in March. In some other countries, it began slightly earlier, like in Italy, I believe it began in the last week of February or sometime in February, but in the United States, nobody really thought much about this virus. It wasn't on the minds of most people until the second or third week of March. That is when all the shutdowns started occurring. That's when schools were shut down. That is also when masks started becoming a thing that a lot of people wore. That is also right around when the phrase flatten the curve started to trend. Basically, the idea behind that was you limit the amount of time you spend with other people, you limit the amount of social interaction you have in person with other people. That way, you limit the chances that the virus, that COVID 19, has of spreading from person to person. And the idea behind that would be that if the virus spreads more slowly, then it would take longer for the hospitals to be overwhelmed because if the virus spread too quickly, then a lot of people would get the virus at one time and there wouldn't be enough space in the hospital to support those patients. But if the virus spread more slowly through limited contact with other people, then as a result, there would be more space in the hospital because at one point in time there would be that many COVID 19 patients. But COVID 19 got worse and worse in the spring, got better for a bit, then it got a lot worse in the summer, got better for a bit in the late summer, but in early October, middle of October, it started getting really bad. And it got even worse in the last couple of weeks in November. And we're basically at an all time high in both the daily case count and the daily death count. We've never had 3,000 deaths a day throughout this entire pandemic in the United States. Even in the spring when it was killing off a lot of people per day, especially in New York, there was not as many deaths then per day as there is now. We never reached 3,000 deaths per day. And it looks like we're at the absolute peak of this pandemic, at least in the United States. It also appears we're at a peak in the daily case count and death count worldwide. If you look at the daily case count worldwide, we're seeing around 600,000 cases per day, if not more. While earlier in the year, we were only seeing like 200,000 cases per day on average, or even less than that. So worldwide, it has been really bad, but in the United States, it's also been really bad. And I talked about how this third wave, as I call it, has been affecting almost every state in the United States, with the possible exception of Hawaii. The reason why this has been the case, I believe, and a lot of scientists believe, is because of the fact that it is getting colder in the United States, and that is because it's about to be winter, obviously. And this doesn't just apply to the United States. This also applies to a lot of northern hemisphere countries. That is why you're seeing a lot of spikes in a lot of northern hemisphere countries, not just the United States. But the temperature itself doesn't affect how quickly the virus spreads. Apparently, COVID 19 doesn't spread less easily in the heat and doesn't spread more easily in the cold. But what a colder temperature does, the effect of it becoming winter and the temperature being colder, is people stay indoors more. People are less likely to go outside. People are less likely to gather outside and more likely to gather inside. And as we know, COVID 19 spreads more easily in an indoor setting than it does in an outdoor setting. And if more people gather indoors and less people gather outdoors, that just means that the virus has an easier time of spreading because a lot more people are indoors now than they were like in the summer. And as a result, there are a lot more cases now than there was in the summer. There's a lot more cases per day now than there was a few months ago. In the summer, the peak of the daily case count was around 75,000 cases per day. I believe the daily death count was around 1,500 deaths per day. Especially in July, there was an increase in the daily death count. In June, before the spike happened, at least before the spike affected the daily death count, there was around 800 deaths per day. But once the spike actually affected the daily death count, that increased to around 1,500 deaths per day. Started to go down by quite a bit in August and September, but during the last couple of weeks of October and throughout the month of November, especially, there's been once again a massive increase in the daily death count, and that increase has been even greater than the increase that took place in the spring because we're now seeing 3,000 deaths per day. These are levels that we've never seen before throughout this pandemic in the United States. At its worst, there were around 2,500 deaths per day approximately in the United States, but now we're passing the 3,000 deaths per day mark. So the current daily death count is twice that of the daily death count a few months ago, back in the summer. Even when it was pretty bad in the summer, the daily death count was only half of what we're currently experiencing. That just puts into perspective how bad things have gotten with this virus, but I'm hoping that uh, the vaccine that the FDA just approved of, that the FDA just gave the green light on, the Pfizer vaccine, the Pfizer slash BioNTech vaccine, I hope that'll actually start to have an impact on the daily case count and daily death count for this virus. And I hope that we can start to see after this wave clears up. I hope this is the last wave of the pandemic, the last major wave of the pandemic in the United States. I hope that after this wave of COVID 19 clears up in the United States, which I would expect to happen in around late January, early February of 2021. So, right before spring begins in the United States, I'd expect this wave to clear up. Right now, we're at the peak of this wave, and I expect the peak to be sustained for a couple more weeks, but by early January, I expect the daily case count to slowly decrease, and by middle of January or late January, I expect the daily death count to slowly decrease. So I expect to be out of the woods for this wave maybe by mid to late February now that I think about it, but I think that soon after that, the vaccine will be available to a lot of people, and I'm hoping that that'll cause any more major waves from occurring. I'm hoping that after the vaccine is available to a lot of people in the spring of 2021 and the summer of 2021, that'll result in no new major waves of COVID 19 appearing. I expect herd immunity for this virus to take place in the United States in late 2021 because it takes many months for for this vaccine to get to many people in the United States. I think it'll take many months in the United States for this vaccine to be available to over 200 million people and for all of those people to take the vaccine because we're going to need at least 200 million people in the United States to take this vaccine in order to actually achieve herd immunity. I don't think that'll be done until the second half of 2021, maybe like August or September 2021. I'm just speculating. I cannot predict the future. That is just my prediction, and I hope that by beginning of 2022, this virus will almost completely be gone. I don't expect it to be completely gone, but I'm hoping that it won't be a major factor in the lives of people in the United States by early 2022, by the new year. Not the coming new year, but the one after that, a year from now. December 2021, January 2022. Before this video ends, I would just like to point out the fact that we have hit a record hospitalization count in the United States for the seventh day in a row. So for the past week in the United States, we've been experiencing new records in terms of the number of patients who have been hospitalized as a result of COVID 19. In fact, just today, December 12th, 2020, we had across the country, 108,487 COVID-19 patients get hospitalized as a result of the disease. So I just want to urge you guys to stay safe out there. There's only a few months left of this.